The richest people in the room are usually the quietest, not because they have nothing to say, not because they are shy or introverted or socially awkward, not because they lack the confidence to make themselves known, but because somewhere in the generational transmission of wealth and power, the families that built the most enduring fortunes learned something that the newly rich and the almost rich and the want to appear rich have not yet understood. Visibility is a liability. This is the first and most counterintuitive truth of old money psychology. In a culture saturated with flex culture and personal branding and the relentless performance of success on every available platform, the people who have the most are systematically doing the least to show it. While the newly wealthy are posting their cars and their jets and their watches and their vacations, while the aspirationally middle class are financing displays they cannot sustain, while the entire machinery of social media is optimized to reward conspicuous consumption with engagement and validation, the old money families are sitting quietly, in unremarkable clothes, in unremarkable houses, managing unremarkable social media presences, while their wealth compounds in the dark. This is not modesty. This is not humility. This is not a moral virtue that the wealthy happen to develop alongside their financial success. This is a deliberate, sophisticated, generationally refined strategy of power maintenance that the ultra-wealthy have practiced for centuries, and that the people who study power have consistently overlooked, because the strategy's most essential feature is its invisibility. You cannot understand old money by looking at it, because old money has spent generations making itself impossible to find by looking. This video is about what they are actually doing, why they are doing it, and what the psychology of old money's silence reveals about the true nature of wealth, power, and the relationship between visibility and vulnerability that the display economy was built to make you forget. Old money silence is not a personality trait. It is a curriculum. And like all the most consequential curricula, it is delivered not through explicit instruction, but through the ambient absorption of 1,000 small lessons that collectively install a complete worldview before the child is old enough to question any of its components. The old money child learns to be quiet about wealth, the same way they learn to be quiet in a library, or quiet in a place of worship. Not because someone sits them down and explains the strategic rationale for financial invisibility, but because the environment consistently models and rewards a specific relationship with wealth, one in which the wealth is present but never displayed, acknowledged but never advertised, real but never performed. In old money households, the car in the driveway is functional rather than aspirational. Not because the family cannot afford the aspirational vehicle, they can afford a fleet of them, but because the aspirational vehicle signals new money, and new money signals vulnerability. The clothes are quality without logos. Not because the family is unaware of luxury brands, they own the companies that produce them, but because visible logos are advertising for the brand rather than expression of the wearer. And old money does not advertise for anyone. The house is in a neighborhood that does not appear on aspirational lifestyle content. Not because the family lacks taste, their taste is the standard against which the aspirational lifestyle content measures itself, but because appearing on aspirational lifestyle content creates visibility, and visibility creates exposure, and exposure creates risk. The child absorbs all of this without any of it being explained. The lesson is environmental rather than instructional. And the lesson, absorbed across years of daily immersion in an environment where wealth is present and invisible, produces an adult for whom financial invisibility is not a strategic choice, but a deeply installed identity, the way that people like us relate to money. This is the most powerful form of generational wealth transmission and the least discussed. The financial assets can be lost in a single generation through bad decisions or bad markets. The financial knowledge can be acquired by anyone motivated enough to seek it. But the identity, the bone-deep sense that wealth is something you have, rather than something you display, that power operates through invisibility, rather than visibility, that the truly secure do not need to signal their security. This is the inheritance that produces dynasties, rather than single-generation wealth. And it is the inheritance that the display economy, the social media platform, and the aspirational marketing industry have the most commercial interest in preventing from spreading beyond the families that currently hold it. The visible expression of old money silence in the material world is what has been called quiet luxury, an aesthetic of extraordinary quality without identifiable branding, of craftsmanship without advertisement, of refinement without performance. Quiet luxury is not cheap. It is frequently more expensive than the logo-covered alternatives that signal wealth to the uninitiated. A cashmere sweater with no visible branding from a heritage manufacturer costs more than the logo-covered equivalent from a brand whose entire business model is the logo. A bespoke suit from a century-old tailor costs more than the designer suit whose label is sewn visibly into the fabric. The materials are finer, the construction more careful, the longevity greater, the experience of wearing more complete, and none of it is visible to anyone who does not already know exactly what they are looking at. This is the point. Quiet luxury is legible only to other people who already operate in the same world. It is a code rather than a billboard, and the code's function is to create recognition among peers while remaining invisible to everyone outside the circle. The old money person wearing the unbranded cashmere and the bespoke suit is not invisible to other old money people. They are immediately and completely legible to each other. The code is read instantly by those who know it, and not read at all by those who do not. This bidirectional legibility, readable to peers, invisible to outsiders, is the aesthetic's entire strategic function. The new money person buys the logo because the logo is readable to everyone, including people they want to impress who are not in their world. The old money person buys the quality without the logo because they have no interest in being legible to people outside their world, and every interest in being legible to people within it. The aesthetic difference between new money and old money is therefore not primarily a difference in taste, though it often becomes one over time. It is primarily a difference in audience. New money performs for the widest possible audience because the validation sought is broad and external. Old money performs only for its own world because the validation sought is narrow and internal. The recognition of peers who understand what the unbranded cashmere actually costs and what it actually signals. This is why the old money aesthetic feels effortless, while the new money aesthetic feels effortful. Effort in presentation signals that the presentation required effort, that the status being displayed is not native, but performed. The appearance of effortlessness signals that the status is native, that this is simply how people like us look and live without trying, because the trying was done generations ago. The relationship between visibility and vulnerability is one of the most important and least discussed dynamics in the psychology of wealth and power. And understanding it requires understanding something about how power actually operates at the highest levels that the culture of fame and celebrity has systematically obscured. Power, at its most fundamental, is the ability to shape outcomes, to make things happen or prevent things from happening, to influence events and decisions in ways that serve your interests. And the exercise of power at this level is most effective when it is least visible. Not because secrecy is inherently more powerful than transparency. It is not, always. But because visible power is contestable power. When your influence is visible, it can be identified, mapped, challenged, regulated, taxed, and opposed. When your influence is invisible, when the outcomes you shape appear to emerge from neutral market forces or natural social dynamics or impersonal institutional processes, it is effectively immune to opposition because the opposition cannot identify a target. You cannot contest what you cannot see. You cannot regulate what you cannot name. You cannot tax what you cannot locate. The old money families who have maintained their position across multiple generations understand this with a depth of practical experience that no theory can fully convey. The Rockefeller family did not maintain its position across 5 generations by remaining visibly associated with the power that the Rockefeller fortune represents. It maintained its position by converting visible wealth into invisible institutional influence. Through foundations, through political relationships, through ownership structures that separate the visible face of institutions from the actual source of their direction. The Rothschild family's generational survival across 2 centuries of European political upheaval was not achieved through the visibility of their wealth and power, quite the opposite. The family's deliberate cultivation of a low profile, their refusal to associate with the political visibility that made other banking dynasties targets during periods of instability, their maintenance of family control through private structures rather than public ones. These were not accidents of temperament, but strategic choices, refined across generations of experience, with what happens to visible wealth during periods of social and political turbulence. Billionaires who achieve the kind of fame that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos carry are not exhibiting old money behavior. They are exhibiting new money behavior. The drive for recognition and validation that the old money identity was specifically conditioned to suppress. The visibility their fame represents is a vulnerability that old money families spend generations training their children to avoid. Because famous people are targets, they attract regulatory attention, political opposition, social resentment, legal challenges, and the full machinery of public accountability that private wealth successfully avoids. The fear of fame among the truly established wealthy is not false modesty. It is a survival mechanism refined across centuries of observing what happens to the visibly wealthy during periods of instability. The invisible wealth survives. The visible wealth becomes a target. The old money family's relationship with social media is one of the most revealing expressions of old money psychology in the contemporary world. And the relationship is characterized not by a considered decision to limit social media use, but by the same ambient identity that produces the unbranded cashmere and the unremarkable car. A deep, installed, entirely natural disinterest in performing your life for an audience of strangers. Old money does not post its vacations. Not because the vacations are not extraordinary, they are, but because posting a vacation is a performance, and performing is what people do when they need external validation for what they have. When you genuinely belong to the world you inhabit, you do not need to prove your membership to outsiders. The need to post is itself the signal that the relationship with the experience is mediated by the audience, rather than direct. The old money person on the extraordinary vacation is actually on the vacation. The new money person on the same vacation is on the vacation and simultaneously performing the vacation for an audience. The experience is different. The relationship to the experience is different. And old money finds the mediated relationship, the experience filtered through the question of how it will appear to others, both foreign and faintly sad. Old money does not display its possessions because old money does not understand the emotional logic of displaying possessions. The display economy's entire mechanism depends on the felt need for external validation of the things you have. But old money's relationship with its possessions is not mediated by external validation. The quality of the object, the craft of its maker, the private pleasure of ownership, these are sufficient. The idea of photographing the object and posting it for strangers to assess is as conceptually foreign to the old money identity as photographing your breakfast would have been to your grandparents. The behavior is not wrong. It is simply not something that a person in this relationship with wealth would think to do. This is perhaps the most important insight about old money social media abstention. It is not discipline. It is not restraint. It is not willpower exercised against the desire to post. It is the absence of the desire. The old money identity does not experience the social media validation pull with the same intensity that the display economy conditioned identity does, because the old money identity's relationship with validation is fundamentally different. The validation sought is internal rather than external, peer-based rather than mass-based, earned over decades rather than generated by a post. The social media platforms, despite their extraordinary cultural reach, have not successfully installed the display imperative in environments where the old money identity is fully formed. The old money child does not grow up in the ambient display anxiety that social media generates in the communities it has successfully colonized. And the result is an adult for whom the display imperative simply does not operate with the force that makes it feel compulsory to everyone else. The most consequential thing that old money families do is not the financial planning, the trust structures, the estate planning, the educational preparation, or the professional networking. All of those are important, and all of them are done. But the most consequential thing is the psychological conditioning, the installation of an identity relationship with wealth and power that makes every subsequent decision automatic rather than deliberate. The old money child learns to evaluate people not by what they display, but by what they know and who they are. Because in old money environments, display is a signal of unsophistication rather than success. The person at the dinner party talking about their cars, their jet, their recent luxury acquisitions is not impressing anyone at the table. They are revealing their relationship with wealth, that it is new enough to still feel extraordinary rather than simply ordinary, that the validation they seek is still external rather than internal, that they have not yet settled into the comfortable invisibility that genuine security produces. The old money child learns that money is a tool rather than a goal, a means rather than an identity, a resource to be deployed rather than a status to be communicated. This is not a philosophical position they adopt. It is the water they swim in, the ambient assumption of an environment where wealth has been present long enough that its presence is unremarkable. The excitement about money, the pride in money, the performance of money. These are responses to an experience of wealth that is still new enough to feel exceptional. Old money's wealth is old enough to feel ordinary, and the ordinary does not need to be performed. The old money child learns to identify and associate with people whose judgment and character and competence are the primary criteria, rather than their display level. This is not elitism, though it has elements of that. It is the practical wisdom of a class that has learned through centuries of experience that the displaying person and the capable person are often very different people. That the network worth building is built on quality of judgment rather than visibility of lifestyle, and that the truly valuable relationships are with people who are also operating in the invisible upper register of genuine capability and genuine security. The old money child learns patience, the patience of people who think in generations rather than quarters, who measure wealth in decades rather than bonuses, who understand that the financial decisions made today will compound into realities that outlive the decision maker. This temporal orientation is perhaps the most important psychological inheritance of old money, and the one most difficult for display economy conditioned people to replicate. The display economy is optimized for immediacy, the immediate purchase, the immediate post, the immediate validation. The old money orientation is optimized for the long arc, the compounding that is invisible for years before it becomes undeniable. Understanding old money silence requires understanding why the display economy, the aspirational marketing, the social media platform, the fast fashion industry, the consumer finance system does not target old money. And the answer reveals more about the display economy than about old money. The display economy targets people whose psychological relationship with wealth is mediated by external validation. People for whom the display produces the felt need that drives the purchase. People whose identity is sufficiently unstable in relation to their financial position that the status signal of the luxury item actually produces a meaningful shift in their sense of self. People who have been conditioned by the ambient display culture to experience their worth as visible rather than internal. Old money's identity is not available to the display economy's mechanism because old money's relationship with its worth is not mediated by external validation. The status anxiety that makes the display economy function, the chronic felt inadequacy that drives the compulsive purchase, does not operate with the same intensity on an identity that was conditioned for generations in an environment where the wealth was present, secure, and unremarkable. This is why the most sophisticated luxury brands, the old money brands, the ones with centuries of history and minimal visible branding, do not advertise in the way that the new money luxury brands do. They do not need to create desire because their customers' relationship with the brand is not driven by desire, but by recognition. The old money customer buys the unbranded cashmere because it is the best available expression of a quality orientation they were raised with, not because a campaign made them want it. The brand simply needs to exist with integrity. The customer finds it. The display economy's entire commercial infrastructure, the influencer, the aspirational content, the status anxiety amplification, is built for the portion of the population whose identity relationship with wealth is still mediated by external validation. It is built for people who are still trying to establish their position rather than maintaining one. And understanding this reveals something important. The display economy is not targeting the wealthy. It is targeting the people who want to appear wealthy. And the more successfully it captures them, the further from actual wealth they travel. The experience of old money silence from the inside is not the experience of restraint. It is the experience of sufficiency, of genuine satisfaction with what is present, rather than chronic dissatisfaction driving the pursuit of what is absent. The old money person at a social event is not restraining themselves from discussing their wealth. The wealth simply does not feel like the most interesting or important thing about them, and it does not occur to them that it would feel like that to anyone else. The conversation turns instead to ideas, to people, to situations, to the things that genuinely interest them, because those are the things that a life of sufficient material security has the luxury of being genuinely interested in. This is one of the least discussed privileges of genuine wealth, the ability to be genuinely interested in things other than your material circumstances. The person in financial precarity is necessarily oriented toward material circumstances because their material circumstances are a problem that demands attention. The person in genuine security has the psychological freedom to orient their attention toward things that interest them rather than things that threaten them. The intellectual range, the curiosity, the genuine engagement with ideas that old money environments often produce is not a function of superior intelligence. It is a function of not having the majority of one's mental and emotional energy consumed by financial anxiety. Old money silence is also the silence of someone who understands that most of what the display economy offers is simply not interesting. The social media validation is not interesting because it is manufactured and temporary. The status signal of the visible luxury brand is not interesting because it is legible to the wrong audience. The drama of conspicuous consumption is not interesting because the dramatic arc, desire, acquisition, brief satisfaction, renewed desire, is completely predictable and infinitely repeating with no destination. What is genuinely interesting from the inside of old money's orientation is the long game, the compounding, the quiet accumulation of the things, relationships, knowledge, financial position, institutional influence, that actually matter and that actually last. The things that do not make good social media content and do not generate likes and do not produce the brief validation hit of the status signal. The things that produce the sustainable security and genuine freedom that the display economy sells the appearance of while systematically preventing the reality. Old money's psychological inheritance is not available to most people through birth. The generational conditioning, the ambient environment, the identity installation that makes the old money relationship with wealth natural rather than effortful. These are the products of environments that most people were not raised in. But the understanding of why old money operates this way is available to everyone, and the understanding changes what is possible. You can choose to redefine what visibility means in your own life, not through willpower applied against the display impulse, but through the genuine understanding that the display impulse was installed by a system that profits from it, and that the installation is not your identity. It is what your identity was made to feel like by an environment that needed you to experience the display as necessary. You can choose to build a different reference group, not the aspirationally curated highlight reels of the display economy, but the genuinely secure people in your actual life and learning environment whose relationship with wealth is characterized by the quiet competence and genuine satisfaction that old money exhibits at its best. You cannot absorb the old money identity through osmosis if you are not raised in it, but you can study its logic, understand its mechanisms, and make choices that align with its orientation rather than the display economies. You can choose to make the invisible visible in your own financial life. Not the invisible wealth of old money, that comes later through compounding, but the invisible costs of the display, the foregone growth, the compounded alternative to every display purchase. Making those numbers concrete and emotionally real rather than abstractly theoretical. Using them as the reference point for financial decisions rather than the social validation signal that the display economy has trained you to use. You can choose to operate in the long arc rather than the immediate cycle, to measure your financial progress in years and decades rather than in purchases and posts, to build the thing that compounds in the dark rather than the thing that performs in the light. Old money built its position across generations by understanding something that the display economy does not want you to know. That the quiet accumulation in the dark produces more than the brilliant performance in the light. That the invisible wealth is more secure than the visible kind. That the genuinely arrived do not need to signal their arrival, because the arrival was never the point. The point was always the long game. The richest people in the room are usually the quietest. Now you know why. And now you know what the quiet is actually saying.